Hudson Hawk is a 1991 action comedy directed by Michael Lehman.
Bruce Willis plays Eddie the Hawk Hawkins, otherwise known as the titular Hudson Hawk, who is a world-famous cat burglar. Although quite how cat burgling and being world-famous go together, I don't know. But he's just getting out of a 10-year stretch in prison and he wants to go straight. No more cat burgling for him. But before he's even out of the prison gates, his parole officer, of all people, is trying to get him to do another job at an auction house. So he declines. He's picked up by his friend Tommy, played by Danny Aiello. And they go back to the bar that they co-own. There's some mobsters there who also want him to do this job at the auction house. If he doesn't do it, well, you can guess what they'll do. So, unfortunately, he decides, okay, I'm going to have to go ahead with it. And Tommy's along for the ride as well. He breaks in and steals this. It turns out it's a Da Vinci sculpture that they want stolen. And then all sorts of other people start to get involved. There's a weird sort of English butler kind of guy by the name of Alfred, and then the CIA are involved. And at the top of all this are Darwin and Minerva Mayflower, who own this massive company. They're billionaires, and they want this artwork for their own sort of nefarious purposes. A lot of people involved, a lot of backstabbing and double-crossing and a convoluted plot with old Hudson Hawk stuck in the middle, not knowing what's going on.
Along with the rest of us.
Yeah.
So this is now our third week, and I just kind of apologise when you're going to be watching this. I have no idea because last week's went out late. It's just I've been so busy with work, so I will get to them when I get to them. So we're not like disappearing or anything like that.
We're still here.
We're still here. I just a lot of summer holidays, and my work is just I've been so busy. I've just been work, and I get home, and the last thing I want to do is switch on the computer. So. This one will hopefully come, obviously you're watching it now, so it's out, isn't it? So that's weird. So, Hudson Hawk, strange one, this one. Mm-hmm. I had seen it years and years and years ago. I don't know when I saw it.
I'm the same. I saw it a long time ago. I remembered bits of it, but a long time ago.
So this is still in our themed month of box office misses. So this is another one that... obviously was released. Hopefully they were hoping for a big hit, and what they got was a big miss instead.
Yeah, I mean, in the US it was released on the 24th of May, so sort of early summer. It had a budget of $65 million, and domestically in the US it only took $17 million. So,
a bit of a loss there.
Yeah, but I mean, internationally it did, I think it took another 80 million eventually. Right. So, it did make its money back, but I mean, we're sort of focusing on sort of the domestic US takings. That's when films are released generally, they'll look at the opening weekend and then what the drop-off is the following weekend, and that kind of denotes whether it's going to be successful or not. And yeah, this didn't do too well. It's not really surprising, is it?
It's not hard to see why. I mean, where to start with this one? I mean, it's Bruce Willis. It's Bruce Willis coming off the back of films like Die Hard, Die Hard 2.
Yeah.
Look Who's Talking. These are films that were big successes for him. In reading about this, it seems as though this was a bit of a vanity project for him. He wrote it. He came up with the idea, I think, along with a friend of his, and got a load of money. Obviously, I think Joel Silver produced it, who worked on Die Hard 2. Is that correct? Maybe Die Hard.
Yeah,
and Die Hard, the first one as well. And so, obviously, managed to secure a lot of money for this film. Kind of went off around the world with filming in Italy and New York and other locations, and I don't know. If you know much about Bruce Willis, he seems to be someone who can be quite. I think he can be quite because he's so well known and he's had so much success. I think he's one of those actors that kind of, a bit like Tom Cruise, kind of puts their creative. He kind of takes over from the director. I think a little bit.
He can do. I mean, I think sometimes he'd be quite serious about it. Quite intense. Maybe takes over a little bit too much. Perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read an interview with Terry Gilliam where he said on the set of 12 Monkeys he was kind of trying to take over a bit, but then obviously someone like Terry Gilliam, he knows what he wants, and at the end of the day he's got his own vision, and woe betide anyone that maybe comes in and tries to take over where he is concerned.
We talked about it on Die Hard 2, didn't we? We did a few months ago, and he wanted to make it a lot more serious and didn't want any jokes.
Yeah,
so in the end they had to agree for him to film, several takes with no jokes and then film one take with a humorous line in, and that every time they used that take in the film.
Yeah, exactly. Which is quite interesting, actually, because here you've got a film that is kind of his project, and it's not serious at all. No. It's completely OTT. It's completely over the top and weird, and you're like, to the point of, again, reading about it, I think it was a very much of a homage to lots of like some of the old Hitchcock films. To Catch a Thief and films like that. He's the cat burglar in there, but then also a kind of homage to a lot of the kind of slapstick. It's quite Three Stooges at times.
There's lots of kind of stuff,
comic book violence. There's a weird shot near the end where he's kind of trying to miss something and he's flipping backwards and forwards, which is a bit it's a bit kind of cartoon like. It's too much. It's too full on for real life, and it's very silly at times.
It doesn't always. At the end there is that bit where he's going backwards and forwards and he gets slapped around the face.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really happen all the time.
Not all the time.
So it doesn't really commit to that. If it was like that the whole way through, you'd say, "Oh, this film's just silly," and you can go with it. But when it's not like that all the time, you're quite. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah, it's a bit kind of out of kilter. There's some stuff that's silly. There's some stuff that I think it's taking it. At times you feel like it's taking itself seriously, and other times you feel like they're just having a good old laugh. And I think that hurts it. I think a little bit.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting in here, there's an interesting plot in here. I think the whole plot with stealing these works of art belonging to Leonardo da Vinci and having to go to Italy. I think was an interesting. There's interesting ideas in there, and it's an interesting plot in itself. Getting this kind of world famous cat burglar to go and do this kind of steal art from this world famous artist, I think is really interesting. And I think there's certainly stuff in there which I did enjoy, but I can see why it was a flop.
Yeah.
And also I think they marketed it to be like a film like Die Hard.
Yeah.
They marketed it as being the next kind of Bruce Willis action film, which it's not. Yes, it's got action in there, but it's got a lot of very strange characters and off-the-wall jokes. Some work, some don't. There's some interesting visual stuff in there. There's this great bit near the beginning where he's punched out and he falls backwards into a box of like polystyrene pieces. And that scene of him falling back, I thought, well, that's quite an interesting visual moment there. There's a moment where, because he wears these shades and he's in Italy and he's talking to James Coburn, who of course is in the film as well. You can see James Coburn's kind of reflection in the glasses. I thought that was quite stylish. There's some interesting kind of... it's obviously directed by Michael Lehmann, who we spoke about, he did Airheads. But he did Heathers. That was like one of his kind of big movies. So he's a very capable director. And I do think there was some interesting stuff. There's some interesting look. There's some interesting visuals going on. Some good visual gags. But a lot of it doesn't work. And I think ultimately it's probably why it failed at the box office. Yeah. Both that and the fact that it was marketed on the back of something like Die Hard. There were people who liked it. Strangely in this country, Barry Norman liked it.
Did he?
And Mark Kermode liked it. There's a funny quote. Richard E. Grant, who plays the two. So there's the two kingpins are played by Richard E. Grant and Sandra Bernhard. I'm never quite sure if they're actually married or if they're brother and sister. There's kind of odd.
I hadn't thought about that.
Odd kind of, because they're never really they're not as close as husband and wife.
No,
they're both very strange, and obviously they're both quite animated looking as well. I think, was it Mark Kermode said to Richard E. Grant that he liked it, and Richard E. Grant was like, it's a stealing pile of crap, you are an idiot for liking this film. But Mark Kermode's spoken quite highly of this film over the years. It is eccentric. I would say it's eccentric. This film. It's got a kind of feeling. There's a lot of British comedies that came out of the early 90s, like Nuns on the Run and The Pope Must Die, and films like that, which are kind of they follow. They're quite zany, and they have zany characters in, and the jokes don't always work, but sometimes they do. And that's what this film felt like to me.
Yeah.
So if you like those films, you probably could like this.
Richard E. Grant and Sandra Bernhard basically turn it up to 11.
Completely.
But then everyone else almost is as well.
Yeah.
So there's no kind of straight man or anything like that. So it's like everyone's full on all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just a bit much.
Yeah.
You got Bruce Willis constantly pulling over the top facial expressions and Andy McDowell doing dolphin impressions.
Yeah, I mean, she's kind of, it's weird.
She's the straightest, probably, but even at the end she goes a bit nuts.
Until then, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you've got the CIA, the James Coburn in charge, and then you've got 4 agents, all named after candy bars.
Yeah, and they're all equally over the top.
And it's like... I know, I get that it's a ridiculous comedy that's supposed to be over the top, but they're completely, Butterfinger is completely inept. It's like, he can barely function as a human being. How is he in the CIA? It doesn't make any sense. I know it's just a film and it's meant to be ridiculous, but there's no plausibility there whatsoever. It's like, how is he just in the CIA because he's massive? Is that it? He's just muscle. You need more than that, I think, to get into the CIA. So,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a bit odd. And the plot is, it's not hard to follow, but it's so convoluted, and you've got so many
different characters.
Yeah, and they all tie in together, and it's like, but then they start double crossing each other, and you're like, does it need to be this complicated?
Yeah.
So it seems a bit. There's almost too many characters in there.
Yeah.
And the villains, Sandra Bernhard. There's a big section where you don't see, Richard E. Grant and Sandra Bernhard get introduced, but then there's a big chunk where you don't see them for ages, and you kind of almost forget about them until they then reappear, and it's like, but they're the main villains. But you got all this other stuff going on. Yeah, it kind of doesn't give some of the characters room to breathe, really.
These characters with the CIA, I mean, again, they're probably the most comic book out of. There's David Caruso is in there, and he plays Kit Kat.
Yeah.
He turns up behind Bruce Willis in Italy, mimicking all his moves.
Yeah.
And then it's just so straight. But again, it's quite interesting. It's like,
it's
like why they clearly put these interesting. I was reading. I think Bruce Willis was kind of overtaking creatively. So he must have come up with these like that would be an interesting idea.
And he doesn't speak. He has cards.
He has cards
that he shows to people with phrases on. It's like, but why? But then it's quite a violent. I don't say it's violent. I mean, it's quite violent.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody gets their throat cut, and there's lots of explosions and things. I mean, there's a lot of swearing. So it's quite an adult film, but almost with like childlike slapstick and comedy and
yeah,
stuff.
It's a little bit like Dick Tracy, which also was kind of out at that time. But then it is more of a comic book film, that one. Yeah,
just all a bit odd.
A very odd movie. I mean,
and then there's the whole singing thing where obviously Bruce fancies himself as a bit of a singer.
Yeah.
Fine, that's fair enough. But yeah, him and Danny Aiello, they basically use the songs to time what they're doing, because they know, for some reason, Bruce has an encyclopedic knowledge of the length of certain songs.
Yes.
So yeah, they'll sing songs.
I thought it was a bit of a Baby Driver moment, when they were like doing the music, along to the crime.
A little bit. And then there's a running gag where he just wants a cappuccino. It's like there's lots of little amusing ideas that would be fun on their own, but there's too many, it just ends up being a ridiculous mess.
Someone said it was kind of, this to Bruce Willis is what Waterworld was to Kevin Costner. It's just a big old, I'm going to do what I want to do because I'm the king of the world and no one's going to stop me. And yeah, I was reading.
But Waterworld is awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. Yeah, it's a great film. But I would personally say this wasn't terrible. I mean,
it's not terrible.
I thought there was some good. Some of the acting was okay. I mean, it was, it's Bruce Willis being Bruce Willis, Andy McDowell being Andy McDowell, Danny Aiello being. I mean, what they're known for was kind of what was going on in here. I mean, Richard E. Grant is known for being quite over the top.
I mean, yeah, he's loads of fun, and Sandra Bernhard, they're both loads of fun to watch.
They are,
bizarre.
Completely bizarre. I mean, Richard E. Grant is always, with Nail and I, he's pretty over the top in that, and How to Get Ahead in Advertising. The films that he's known for, he is OTT.
Yeah.
Sandra Bernhard is OTT. It was Roseanne. I remember from
possibly.
Although she is in King of Comedy, Scorsese's film. So I found this book on Google Books, which is a good source. It was called "Hit and Run: How John Peters and Peter Guber Took Sony for a Ride in Hollywood," written by Nancy Griffin. But it was interesting just reading this section on this film. So I think Peter Guber and John Peters were Sony executives But the book sounds quite mad, actually. It's kind of about how the two executives kind of took over Sony, and they were quite maybe a bit anarchic in how they ran things. But they seem to suggest that Bruce Willis thought he was making a kind of MTV type hip film like Wayne's World with this film. But they themselves, they knew it was going to fail.
Right.
But they just kind of let him get on with it a little bit. That's what the book suggested anyway, which I thought was quite interesting. And because of the success of things like Die Hard 2 and Look Who's Talking. He's interesting because he's obviously known as being a serious film actor. A lot of his films are serious. But he can do comedy. He's okay at comedy. I mean, Look Who's Talking. Obviously, it's his voice in that, but he's very funny in that film, and I think he can do comedy very well. And I think he came originally from comedy, didn't he?
Moonlighting. I mean, it's not a straight out comedy, but no, it is.
Yeah.
I would say his character, I haven't seen Moonlighting in a long, long time, but I would say his character is probably not completely dissimilar to Hudson Hawk, maybe a little bit.
Right.
I mean, he's probably closer to Hudson Hawk than it would be to John McClane, let's say.
I got the sense with this film he was doing what he wanted to finally do.
Yeah.
Because obviously Die Hard, he was hired for that. He was very good for that. But maybe that's not where he saw his career going.
No,
originally.
he didn't want to be typecast as sort of action guy, which he kind of ended up being
Which
anyway.
he did end up being, yeah.
I mean, he kind of, after this, I think he had a bit of a lull until Pulp Fiction, which was kind of a little bit of a comeback because he made Colour of Night and Striking Distance and things like that.
Was terrible, Colour of Night. Yeah, well, God. Although I saw it quite a lot.
But he did. His career took a bit of a downturn. Yeah, he came back with Pulp Fiction, and then of course he did Die Hard with a Vengeance, and it went up a bit. But I mean, these days he makes a lot of direct-to-video stuff.
He does nowadays, doesn't he?
Straight to streaming or whatever are the phrases these days.
Yeah.
Unless the project is just right and he's really 100% on board, it comes across on screen that he's not particularly interested. I mean, the last Die Hard, he was essentially playing himself.
Yeah, and that's. I mean, I think that's the trouble with the downside for him is that he was so typecast so heavily. I mean, there's some great films in the 90s that he made. Obviously, 12 Monkeys is another. Last Man Standing is a really good film.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
He did some good stuff in the 90s, and what's interesting here is he's clearly relishing what he's doing on screen. You can see it. You can see it in his face.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He's enjoying it, and he clearly is having a genuine ride with it, which you cannot take. That's great to see. I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that does help with the enjoyment. While the whole film is completely ridiculous, if those on screen are enjoying what they're doing, that you can sense that, and it does help you to enjoy it, even if you're not really totally on board with the plot.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I kind of went with it. And a couple of times it made me laugh. There was a bit at the end which made me chuckle quite a lot. There were many films that are a lot worse. I can see why it failed at the box office. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, how did it here in this country? Do you know?
Not specifically here, no. I mean, I know obviously internationally it did better, although still 80 million for the rest of the world. Right. Still wasn't a huge amount of money.
No.
Obviously enough to make back its budget, but no, I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it probably was more popular in Europe, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because it's.
I mean, around that time, I mean, we have a lot of kind of slapstick violence stuff ourselves, especially on TV with Young Ones and Bottom and things like that. Is something that we've always done quite, and that kind of anarchic humour. So maybe that's why it was maybe a bit more successful outside of America, but not in America at that time.
No,
obviously, in the past, like I said, Three Stooges and things like that, they do have that kind of violent slapstick humour as well. But then maybe it wasn't so big around that time, and it's something that came back later. I don't know. It's also that, isn't it? It's when things get released, they might not be a success at that moment in time, but give it 10 years or so, and then it finds its audience, which is what a lot of other films we've spoken about, Big Trouble in Little China and
I think
other cult films and things like that.
Yeah, but I think probably people just didn't know what to make of this.
No, I mean there is there is a following if you go onto something like Reddit, or there's always a following for any film on Reddit, even the worst films out there. But there's certainly people out there that like this film and get a kick out of watching this film, and I can see why. It's not terrible at all. It's a bit odd, but we don't have it on disc.
No.
We watched it.
There's, I mean, the best version available is in this country. It's released by Signal One, and it's got commentary on it and deleted scenes and behind the scenes stuff and a music video as well. I think no other releases appear to have any extras of any note.
Okay.
So if you are a fan of it, then and you can play, I think it's Region B locked, I would imagine. So if you can play Region B, then that's the one to pick up if you are a fan. But it's not, despite the fact that it was a failure, it's not, it's been released, not in a number of countries, and it was, widely available on DVD. So it's not hard to find. It's fine. It passed the time, but I wouldn't rush to watch it again.
I don't know. I'm now thinking I might pick up the Signal One disc because if you
Go
say it's
for
got
it.
a commentary, I'd be quite. Who does the commentary? Do you know?
I think it was with Michael Lehman.
Yeah, I'd be quite interested to check that out actually. And I mean, it's weird. I kind of enjoyed it.
Fair enough.
There was enough visual weirdness in there. There were some good visual moments, and that for me was maybe enough. And
It's won you over with its weird charm.
So that was Hudson Hawk, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Hit the subscribe button up there, and don't forget to push the bell for notifications. There's some other videos to check out over there. Come and find us on social media, and join us again next week for another video.